So, today we're going to be talking about intellectual property, which is the right to produce, as a monopoly, some commodity for a limited period of time. So, intellectual property includes copyrights and patents, as well as trade secrets, which are when you're not explicitly given any protection by the government, but you keep secret the way to produce something, so you're the only one who's able to produce it. Another form of IP is one that comes sort of out of cultures, which is what I call authenticity rents. And if you looked at the problem set from Econ 242, the last problem was sort of about that. But you know, even if you can perfectly reproduce Louis Vuitton bags, a lot of people want an original Louis Vuitton bag, not a rip-off, even if it's completely the same, because they want to feel that they have the original thing, and that effectively gives a monopoly right to Louis Vuitton to produce those bags. Now, intellectual property is one of the oldest tools of economic policy. In fact, in 7th century BC Greece, there's records of giving an exclusive right to produce a dish if it was really delicious, and was come up with by someone for a big celebration that they had. So, there's a very long tradition of intellectual property. So today we're going to learn about the trade-offs involved in intellectual property policy, and a little bit about the relationship of that to optimal criminal justice. So I'm going to start by talking about what monopoly profits incentivize, and then about the dynamics of markets and creative destruction. And then I'll talk very briefly about the static and dynamic effects of crime and relate those to the importance of incentives for innovation. I'll then talk about the harms that come from intellectual property, and therefore the trade-off between innovation incentives and these ex post distortions. That'll motivate a model of optimal intellectual property, and then I'll derive from that some comparative statics and lessons for policy, as well as some broader perspectives on industrial policy. Okay, so far we've viewed the monopoly's profits as really just being a transfer from consumers to the firm, and therefore we either viewed it as being benign or maybe harmful from the perspective of like distribution, because we don't want to give so much money to rich business people. We might want to give them to poor consumers, but not playing any role other than distribution. But what I want to emphasize today is that monopoly profits encourage people to pursue monopoly, and that may be at least as important, if not a more important, feature of the monopoly problem than are the static distortions. Now, some of the profits that a monopoly earns may be left as a true rent to the person who gets the monopoly, but a lot of them are a reward for something that that person did in the past, which was costly, and therefore there may be substantial elasticity of economic activity with respect to this, right? So this makes it very important to try to figure out how people obtain the monopoly, and therefore what was incentivized by the monopoly existing. So if the activity that created the monopoly was pure wasteful rent seeking, then actually the deadweight loss from monopoly is not just the little triangle we talked about, but a large part of the monopoly profits, because actually those profits will be wasted on the effort to try to obtain the monopoly. On the other hand, monopoly could have been created by someone actually innovating a new product that wouldn't have otherwise existed, right? And in that case, monopoly is actually very beneficial despite its deadweight loss, because it creates profits that encourage people to innovate in the first place, right? And in fact, even if someone captures those monopoly profits, they're not going to capture the consumer surplus. And therefore, there's always going to be an entrepreneurial externality of them creating that market that means that we'd like to reward them even more than the monopoly profits that they earn, right? So the reason that this can be so important is that often the rectangle of monopoly profits is a lot larger than the triangle of deadweight loss. That's true for some demand functions in a standard monopoly model. So the triangle of deadweight loss is smaller than the rectangle for, say, a linear demand function. But more importantly, in an oligopoly setting, as we'll study later, often that deadweight loss will get driven down while the profits will stay quite substantial. And in that case, the profits can be much larger than are the deadweight loss. Okay. So on Thursday, we talked about ways of getting monopoly. Did we? I don't know which Thursday or what I'm talking about. But let me just talk about it again now anyway. So one way you can obtain monopoly is from protection by the government, which you can obtain through lobbying the government. So some examples of that are the licensures that we talked about, chartered corporations back in history. So one reason why countries used to charter corporations is that if you were Britain and you were, say, exporting or importing things, you don't care about the welfare of people in other countries. And so you'd actually like to form a monopoly to try to exploit the people in the other countries as much as possible, right? Another way you can form monopoly is from private or illegal violence, right? So the mafia controls many illegal industries, casinos even, which are legal, but are sort of in and out of prostitution and other things that the mafia is better at controlling. Exclusionary practices can be used to do this as well. So in in Peru, there's a lot of, because there's not much competition policy, there's a lot of use of contracts to keep other people from competing with existing firms. You could form an illegal cartel in a legal industry. And now that antitrust laws make that illegal, and we'll talk more about those in the next few lectures. But in Europe, prior to the emergence of the EU as a strong force, it used to be legal to form those types of cartel agreements. And illegal cartels are still fairly frequent. For example, relatively recently, there was a major cartel in the vitamin industry that was raising prices there. Mergers are another way to acquire a monopoly position. The government reviews these, but they don't always catch all anti-competitive mergers, or they might let some go through that turn out to be anti-competitive. And in some countries, it's completely legal to merge. There's no prohibitions against it. So in Peru, it's not illegal to merge. And in fact, when American companies came in, they bought up all the beer producers in Peru and turned them into basically one monopoly. And a final way, which we'll emphasize today, is intellectual property. So a natural question is, in each of these circumstances, what does monopoly encourage beyond the static distortion? King Solomon, what do you think? In some of these cases we talked about, what sorts of things are going to be encouraged by monopoly?
Well, in the private and illegal violence, it's going to encourage sort of less than good activities, kidnapping and violence, and but in protection by the government from lobbying, it might encourage corruption, and lobbyists trying to persuade politicians in any way possible that they should do.
Yeah, so that's a great example, and that corruption thing was the bad side of it. But there can also be a good side of the desire to get favor with the government, which is that if you're just paying off politicians, that's bad. But if you actually have to persuade the public that your company is good, that might not be so bad. So Bell Labs wanted to maintain, AT&T wanted to maintain a monopoly position that was protected by the government all throughout the 20th century. And what they did, partly in order to accomplish that goal, was they funded a lot of scientific research that made them look good to the public, but was also really valuable for the world. Yeah, Ned?
Well, I was just wanted to make a point that sometimes monopolies established by violence can actually decrease violence in the end.
Yeah, that's right. Often, though, there's a question of how much violence happened ex ante versus how much is reduced ex post. And I think to a large extent, when you allow monopolies to control these routes, the amount of fighting over controlling that monopoly is greater than the amount that the monopoly is able to suppress violence. But it obviously depends on the situation. An illegal cartel can encourage some waste on illegally enforcing the cartel. But in many ways, it's very similar to a merger in terms of what it encourages. And a merger might be harmful. Allowing companies to merge in order to get market power might be harmful because they would merge excessively in order to try to take advantage of market power, and that might have diseconomies of scale. It also might encourage a company to enter an industry as a copycat of an existing company just to try to get bought by that company, right? And in an upcoming problem set for the advanced class, for the Econ 242 class, there's sort of an analysis of that. Intellectual property, which will emphasize the benefits of in terms of encouraging innovation, can also encourage some potentially harmful things. So for example, it might encourage people to like try to just beat someone else to getting a patent so that they can exclude that other person from the market, even though neither of them really was coming up with something completely new. They were just trying to complete it one step ahead of the other person. Or to like steal someone else's ideas so that you can patent and exclude them from the market. So Joseph Schumpeter emphasized the importance of these types of dynamics. So he said that, you know, industrial economics spends way too much time thinking about, at a static level, okay, what prices are the firms charging? Are they price discriminating? Whatever. And not enough thinking about innovation and like progress and new products, which are really the basis of the advancement of the economy, right? He argued that the creative power of capitalism had really transformed society, and that, you know, any of the static distortions of reducing consumption are small in comparison to like the transformation that's come from all the technological advances that have occurred. Now, that's a little bit misleading because, of course, well, in the long term that's true. We also have discounting, and you know, we should think about what's going on now more than about the future. But to a large extent, I think that that's right. Now, did you have a question?
Yeah. How would you model innovation in that way if you don't know what technologies are?
Well, that's sort of what we're going to do today. So.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So he argued that the biggest issue in sort of industrial and competition policy is about the competitive process. And Jing, how did Schumpeter view the competitive process as taking place?
So in competitive process, if a firm like got the intellectual property, it will somehow like discourage the other firms from the innovation process, or it can also like because like you said, if a firm has got intellectual property, it will just eliminate all the other firms. So it can also encourage the other firms from getting the marginal like utility of innovating a little bit.
Well, so that's definitely an interesting issue that people have brought up. But was that what Schumpeter was talking about? Does anyone remember what Schumpeter describes in the article? Yeah, Ryan?
Was he talking about how in order to keep their monopoly power, they would keep trying to make more efficient processes and try and make better innovations so that they can keep being at the top of their...
Yeah, that's right. And Jacob, you want to explain?
It's the idea of evolutionary economics,
yeah.
That the fittest companies will survive.
Yeah, well, and in particular, that like a lot of competition happens not